I'd always dreamed of an apartment like this. A classic pre-war, red brick building somewhere in Chicago, with high ceilings, creaky oak floors, and thick walls that I imagined could drown out the hustle of the metropolis. When I found this unit, a bit neglected, in need of a cosmetic touch-up, but at a ridiculously low price for the neighborhood, I jumped on it. The previous owner, a solitary elderly lady, had passed away about a year ago, and her out-of-state heirs just wanted to offload the property. It was perfect. I spent 2 months and almost all my savings on renovations, and finally moved in, anticipating a quiet, peaceful life. For the first week, that's exactly what I got. A blissful, almost ringing silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the clacking of my laptop keys. I'm a remote software developer, so for me, silence isn't a luxury, it's a professional necessity. I savored it. And then, one night, I heard it for the first time. It was a quiet, almost weightless sigh. As if someone right next to me, in the darkness of the bedroom, had exhaled with infinite weariness. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering in my throat. The room was empty. I chalked it up to the old building settling, or a strange sound from the cast-iron radiator. The building was nearly a century old, who knows what sounds it could make. I forced myself to lie back down and go to sleep. But the sounds began to repeat. Not every night, but chaotically, without any pattern. Sometimes it was the faint creak of a floorboard in the hallway, even though I was alone in the apartment, sitting perfectly still. Other times, it was a muffled, suppressed sob, seeming to come from inside the wall that separated the living room and the bedroom. It was so quiet that the moment I strained to hear it, it would vanish, as if it had never been there. I began my own private war against these sounds. I knocked on walls, checked the pipes, the ventilation. I couldn't hear my neighbors above or below at all, a testament to the building's famed pre-war soundproofing. I even started flipping the circuit breakers at night, killing power to everything, including the fridge, to achieve absolute silence. And in that thick, oppressive quiet, the sounds only became clearer. They weren't loud. No. They were ingrained. Like an old stain on wallpaper that you can no longer scrub away. One evening, while working, I heard something new. From the corner of the room, where the old radiator emitted a low hiss, a melody began to emerge. A gentle, simple tune, like one from an old music box. Snatches of a lullaby. I froze, listening. The melody repeated, the same short fragment, over and over, barely audible through the noise of the circulating water. The developer part of my brain desperately searched for a logical explanation. Auditory pareidolia. The brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random noise. It's just the sound of water in the pipes. Just noise. But in the next second, the quiet sobbing I'd grown accustomed to hearing from the wall layered itself over that ghostly melody. And that no longer felt like a coincidence. It was a scene. A picture painted with sound. Someone was crying to a lullaby. I jumped up, ran to the radiator, and banged my fist on it several times. The melody didn't stop. It just grew fainter, and the crying, for a moment, the crying sharpened into a distinct, childish sob, so full of sorrow that a chill ran down my spine. And then, silence. An absolute, dead silence that was more terrifying than any sound. I stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, and realized my quiet, peaceful life was over. And I didn't know what scared me more, the things I was hearing, or the thought that I was starting to lose my mind. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every creak, every groan from the old building made me flinch. I sat in the silence with the lights on, trying to work, but my eyes kept darting around the room, fixating on the wall or the cursed radiator. Paranoia became my shadow. I needed proof. Something objective, something I could analyze that would confirm I wasn't losing my mind. And so, I decided to record the sounds. I downloaded a voice-activated recorder app on my phone and left it on the living room table each night, the microphone pointed toward the wall. For the first 2 nights, nothing. Absolute silence. The app didn't even trigger a recording. I was starting to think that stress and exhaustion from the move had played a cruel trick on me. That I had imagined it all. On the 3rd night, I had almost given up, but I set up the recorder out of habit anyway. In the morning, I saw 3 audio files on my phone, recorded about an hour apart. My heart sank. I put in my earbuds, turned up the volume, and pressed play. The first file was short, just a few seconds of a low, barely perceptible creak. The second was longer. It was that same quiet sobbing, but through the headphones, it sounded different. More mechanical. Like a looped, corrupted audio track. But it was the 3rd recording that made my blood run cold. It had captured the lullaby from the radiator. But on the recording, layered over the hissing, you could make out an almost inaudible whisper. A woman's. It was repeating the same word over and over, hush, hush. That was the turning point. Now I had proof. It didn't calm me, it terrified me even more. This wasn't random noise. I decided to talk to the building's superintendent, Mr. Henderson, an old man who seemed to have worked there forever. I found him in the basement, fiddling with the water heater. I awkwardly started the conversation, asking about the old pipes, whether they could make strange sounds. He grunted. This building is full of sounds, son. It's old, it has a life of its own. I gathered my courage and asked about the previous owner of my apartment, a Mrs. Gable. Ah, Eleanor, Henderson's face darkened. Quiet woman. Very quiet. Barely spoke to anyone. She was always like that, especially after the tragedy, all those years ago. Lost her child. Just a baby. He fell silent, making it clear the topic was closed. That evening, mulling over his words, I noticed that one of the baseboards in the living room, near that very wall, had come slightly loose. I hadn't paid it any mind during the renovation. Now, driven by some morbid curiosity, I pried it with a screwdriver and pulled it away from the wall. In the gap between the floor and the wall, buried in a layer of ancient dust, was something small. I carefully picked it out with my fingers and brought it into the light. It was a small, silver baby rattle, tarnished with age. Simple, with the initials SG engraved on the handle. I clutched it in my palm. The cold metal seared my skin. And in that exact moment, as if in response to my touch, the quiet, drawn-out cry of a baby sounded again from within the wall. But it wasn't just a sound anymore. Now it had a name. And I was holding its toy. I didn't sleep at all that night. The rattle sat on the kitchen table, and I felt as though it were radiating a faint chill. The sounds that night were different. They no longer seemed random. Now that I knew what had happened, I could hear the desperation in them. The baby's cry was weaker, fading in and out, but the woman's whisper had become more insistent. Hush, hush. Echoed from the wall. It no longer sounded like a request. It was a plea. As if she wasn't pleading with the child, but with silence itself, with death itself. The next day, my eyes red from lack of sleep, I sat down at my laptop. I searched for Eleanor Gable Chicago, and the building's address. There wasn't much. An obituary, a few public records. But then, after stumbling upon the digitized archives of an old local newspaper, I found it. A short article on a back page, dated 1978. Tragedy in residential building. Infant, Samuel Gable, passed away in his sleep from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Mother, Eleanor Gable, discovered the body in the morning. S.G. Samuel Gable. It all clicked into place. The picture the sounds were painting became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a lullaby and a cry. It was the last evening. The final night. A mother rocks a cradle, a music box plays. The baby cries. She whispers to him, "Hush, my love, hush." And then morning comes, and the silence becomes eternal. And she whispers that word again, but no longer to her child, she whispers it to the emptiness, to her broken heart, to the walls that bore witness to her grief. I knew I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't a ghost you could exorcise. It was something else. An emotional echo. An acoustic imprint, left behind in the very fabric of the building by a tragedy of unimaginable force. And I, with my sensitivity to silence, just happened to be the one who could hear it. My brain, used to finding logic in the chaos of code, had found it in the chaos of old sounds, piecing them together into a single, horrifying story. I stopped fighting the sounds. I just listened. Sometimes, working late, I'd hear the snatch of a lullaby and feel not fear, but a deep, piercing sadness. I put the apartment up for sale, citing a sudden need to relocate for work. On moving day, after the movers had carried out the last box, I stood alone in the empty apartment. The silence was deafening. I walked to the wall, took the silver rattle from the table, and gently placed it back in the gap beneath the baseboard. Back where it belonged. This wasn't my story. I was merely a random listener. I closed the door behind me, heard the lock click, and walked down the echoing staircase without looking back. I found myself a new, modern apartment in a soulless residential complex, where the walls are paper thin, and I can always hear my neighbors. And you know what? I'm glad. Because I'm not afraid of noise anymore. I'm afraid of the silence. Afraid of what might be hiding within it, what forgotten tragedies it might start to whisper if you listen too closely. And I never want to listen again.